When competing for a major mixed martial arts promotion like the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the occasional loss is to be expected. That said, a series of setbacks can often result in an athlete losing their spot on the UFC roster. Generally speaking, Dana White and company have utilized a 3 strikes and you're out policy when it comes to losing streaks. Of course, there have been plenty of exceptions to this unwritten rule. One of the most noteworthy aspects regarding lengthy losing streaks in the UFC is that many of the fighters who experienced them previously enjoyed a great deal of success. As we're about to see, the 10 longest streaks in the company's history belong to some pretty big names. As always, if you guys enjoy the video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Now, without further ado, let's take a look at 10 of the worst losing streaks in UFC history. Number 10. Leonard Garcia. Fighting out of Plainview, Texas, Leonard "Bad Boy" Garcia had a pro MMA career full of ups and downs. The former Jackson Wink product made his first stop in the UFC back in 2007, but after a 1-2 start, was subsequently released from the promotion. From there, Garcia would head to World Extreme Cage Fighting and revitalize his career. During his stint with the WEC, Garcia would pick up the biggest wins of his career, defeating former UFC lightweight champ Jens Pulver and the Korean zombie Chan Sung-jun. When the UFC and WEC merged, Garcia would finally get his second chance with the organization. He won his first fight back by picking up a split decision victory over Nam Phan. However, it was all downhill from there. While Garcia established himself as one of the most exciting fighters in the game, wins proved hard to come by. Given his fan-friendly style, the organization gave Garcia plenty of chances to right the ship. Unfortunately, putting on exciting fights wasn't enough, and after 5 consecutive losses, the UFC finally decided to issue Garcia his walking papers in 2013. He would go on to compete and win a championship in Legacy FC before retiring with a record of 18, 13, and 1 in November of 2014. Number 9. Carlos Condit. At the height of his career, the natural-born killer Carlos Condit was one of the world's top welterweights, having won both WEC and interim UFC championships. Condit's epic battle with Robbie Lawler at UFC 195 will likely wind up in the UFC Hall of Fame someday. Moreover, the natural-born killer has wins over stars like Nick Diaz, Dan Hardy, and Thiago Alves. However, the 36-year-old has had a rough go of it in recent years. Following a hard-fought loss to Robbie Lawler, Condit would lose his next 4 fights to Damian Maia, Neil Magny, Alex Oliveira, and Michael Chiesa. Luckily, this past October, the Albuquerque native snapped his 5-fight skid and preserved his UFC roster spot by defeating former Ultimate Fighter winner Court McGee. Number 8. Josh Birkman. The People's Warrior Josh Birkman is a retired MMA veteran who's best remembered for competing in the World Series of Fighting and the UFC. Birkman enjoyed a good deal of success during his World Series of Fighting days and even unsuccessfully challenged for the organization's welterweight title. That said, his 2 tenures in the UFC were mostly forgettable. Birkman's second run with the UFC unfortunately ended with a prolonged losing streak. Between 2016 and 2018, Birkman dropped his last 5 UFC fights to people like Paul Felder, Drew Dober, and Alex Morano. After his release, Birkman competed once more for Legacy Fighting Alliance, where he suffered a split decision loss to William Macario in May of 2019, before deciding to call it a career. Number 7. Rashad Evans. UFC Hall of Famer Sugar Rashad Evans had a remarkable career inside the UFC octagon. The Ultimate Fighter winner is a former light heavyweight champion who's beaten legends like Chuck Liddell, Quentin Rampage Jackson, and Dan Henderson. Despite the many successes during his UFC tenure, as is often the case for many UFC legends, things did not end well for Rashad Evans. After his UFC 192 loss to Ryan Bader, Rashad couldn't seem to recapture the magic that made him great. He would subsequently lose his next 4 contests. In truth, many of the setbacks came against fighters Evans would have likely beaten in his prime. At UFC 225, Anthony Smith handed the former champ his 5th consecutive loss. A few weeks later, Rashad Evans officially announced his retirement. Number 6. Josh Koscheck. Former Division I wrestler Josh Koscheck was first introduced to UFC fans on The Ultimate Fighter's inaugural season. During his time on the series, the welterweight came across as a bully, making him a villainous figure amongst many MMA fans. Still, regardless of how folks may have felt about the brash grappler, Koscheck was an outstanding fighter in his prime. In 2010, he unsuccessfully challenged George St. Pierre for the welterweight title, while also holding notable victories over Matt Hughes and Anthony "Rumble" Johnson. However, after suffering a narrow split decision loss to Johnny Hendricks in May of 2012, things began to unravel for the former title challenger. In his next two contests, Koscheck was on the receiving end of first-round knockouts, courtesy of Robbie Lawler and Tyron Woodley. Losses to Jake Ellenberger and Eric Silva ultimately pushed Koscheck's losing streak to 5 straight. After parting ways with the UFC, Koscheck would try and revitalize his career in Bellator. Unfortunately, recapturing his championship form turned out to be more difficult than expected. In Koscheck's first fight with his new promotion, the former title challenger was knocked out in the very first round, which prompted him to hang up his gloves for good in 2018. Number 5. Andrei Arlovski. Andrei the Pitbull Arlovski is a former UFC heavyweight champion who has been competing professionally since 1999. The 41-year-old veteran is also a rare example of a fighter who managed to turn his career around after a lengthy losing streak. 2 of them, in fact. After his initial stint with the UFC in the early to mid-2000s, a run that saw him capture the heavyweight crown, the Pitbull spent several years competing for other organizations. During his time away, Arlovski would lose 4 consecutive fights, leading pundits to wonder if the Russian's best days were behind him. Of course, Arlovski would go on to win 5 of his next 7 and make his way back to the UFC. However, it wouldn't be all smooth sailing, as his second stint with the promotion has been something of a roller coaster ride. His return to the UFC began with a 4-fight win streak that included victories over standouts like Antonio Bigfoot Silva and Frank Mir. From there, he would then lose his next 5 contests, once again leading folks to wonder if retirement might be a wise option. Yet again, Arlovski would prove the critics wrong. The heavyweight mainstay has won 3 of his last 4 fights and recently re-entered the top 15. Number 4. Elvis Cinesic. Newer fans may not be familiar with the king of rock and rumble, Elvis Cinesic, a former light heavyweight title challenger who shared the cage with stars like Tito Ortiz, Evan Tanner, and Frank Shamrock. The Australian jiu-jitsu specialist fought some of the best the sport had to offer, but came out on the losing end more often than not. At UFC 30, the king of rock and rumble beat the highly rated Jeremy Horn and looked poised to have an impact within the promotion. Sadly, however, it would be his only win inside a UFC octagon, though he would go on to fight for the promotion 6 more times while also competing for other organizations. Despite being tied for the second longest losing streak in UFC history at 6, it should be noted that Elvis faced a murderer's row. Of his 7 UFC opponents, 5 either fought for or held a UFC title. Following his 2007 loss to Paul Cahoon, Elvis Cinesic would retire with an 8-11-2 professional record. Number 3. Phil Baroni. Long Island's Phil, the New York badass Baroni, is an MMA veteran with a colorful personality. Baroni turned pro back in August of 2000 and enjoyed some early success. However, the New York native has struggled when faced with stiffer competition, particularly in the UFC. His first run with the Ultimate Fighting Championship ended in 2005, following a 4-fight losing streak that included setbacks against the likes of Matt Lindland, Evan Tanner, and Pete Sell. Years later, in 2009, Baroni would return for a second stint, though success proved hard to come by. He would drop 2 more fights to Amir Sadallah and Brad Tavares, making it 6 in a row with the promotion prior to his eventual release. Now 44, Phil Baroni is still competing with a record that currently stands at 16-19. Number 2. Hector Lombard. As the inaugural Bellator middleweight champion who never lost a contest under the promotion's banner, the UFC expected big things from Hector Lombard when they signed him in 2012. Of course, the powerhouse out of Cuba had a rough go of it in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. After getting off to a modest, albeit disappointing 3-2 start in the organization, things began to go south for the former Bellator star. Lombard saw a unanimous decision victory over Josh Birkman turn to a no contest after testing positive for anabolic steroids. After serving his suspension, Lombard would go on to tie the record for the second longest active losing streak in UFC history, having come up short in 6 consecutive contests. During that span, he lost to fighters like Johnny Hendricks, Anthony Smith, and Dan Henderson. Since then, Hector has been released from the promotion and currently competes for the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. Number 1. BJ Penn. The prodigy BJ Penn is a former 2-division champion and a UFC Hall of Famer. The proud Hawaiian has wins over legends like Matt Hughes, Renzo Gracie, and Sean Shirk. In his heyday, Penn was widely considered one of the pound-for-pound best. Sadly, despite his many accomplishments, the latter portion of Penn's legendary UFC career was nothing short of a disaster. Though it was clear to most pundits that the former champ's skill had greatly diminished, Penn continued to compete well past his prime. In doing so, he would end up breaking a record no fighter wants to hold, that being the most consecutive losses in UFC history. While competing in 3 separate weight classes, Penn would rack up a record-setting 7 losses in a row, suffering losses to fighters like Nick Diaz, Rory MacDonald, and Frankie Edgar. In 2019, after a video surfaced showing Penn involved in a bar brawl, UFC President Dana White officially decided to cut ties with the former champ. Now 41 years of age, Penn's MMA future outside of the UFC remains uncertain. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.